Coming up in the next half hour, you may have heard during one of our news bulletins earlier that Channel 31, the long-running community station, Channel 31, is due to be switched off on June 30th this year, which is a real tragedy. There's been so many great shows that started on Channel 31. Some ones that ended up with connections to the ABC, indeed, have started there. And it's been a wonderful community resource. But due to changes that the federal government have made in the broadcasting spectrum, it's made it impossible, Channel 31 says, to continue in the way that it has or to go online. You'll find out the end, well, whether it really is going to be the end of this really important community service in a little while after the news headlines with Melissa Brown. Channel 31 has faced the chop, to be blunt about it, a number of times in its long and important history. The last time I think they thought they were going to be switched off was back in 2018, but there was an extension that stayed the execution. But I think this time, when the broadcasting licence expires at the end of June, I think this is it. Shane Dunlop is the General Manager of Channel 31, the community TV station. Shane, good morning.
Good morning, Virginia. Thanks for having me.
Is there a stay of execution in the offing this time?
It doesn't feel like there will be. We're certainly hopeful of one, but it feels like June 30 may well be the end of community TV in Australia.
Now, this is because the federal government wants you to move online, correct?
Yeah, the original decision dates back to 2014. At the time, Malcolm Turnbull was the Minister for Communications, and they wanted to remove us so they could make way for testing of new broadcast technologies. That testing was carried out in 2018 in the vacant markets when our sister stations in Brisbane and Sydney sadly vacated. And that testing was completed in 2018. Ultimately, the mainstream networks who would be theoretically making use of that technology chose not to implement it. So we're, I guess, in a position where the original decision that dates back over half a decade ago is no longer applicable, yet the deadline still stands. And if we are removed at the end of this month, we'll be replaced by white noise. And it could be the case for up to 5 years.
Well, what does that mean then for all the people whose programs you get to broadcast? Do you employ many people there at Channel 31?
Well, across the two stations that are left, there's about 15 staff that will obviously have to look for alternative employment. But there's, up to 1,000 volunteers and contributors that work on community television programs each week. And so you're talking about a huge vacuum that will be, a huge void that will be felt in the arts community across both states. Here in Melbourne, particularly, Channel 31 has been such a huge part of the arts landscape. But not just that, there's also young, youth journalists that are coming up through tertiary organisations that use community television as their, I guess, pathway into that as a career, and they'll lose that opportunity as well. There'll just be a huge, I guess, gap that will be created by this once we're off air at the end of the month.
The move to online, was that always going to be too optimistic for a community station like you?
Definitely. I mean, certainly we accept that eventually this is the way in which the entire television industry is going, and that eventually there will be a requirement of the space we occupy that will be of far greater value to the Australian people. Of course, we are doing everything we can to adopt the technologies for online, obviously expanding into more digital technologies and embracing all the things that come with social media. Relying only on an online business model is a difficult task, and certainly one that the mainstream networks certainly know is not the answer at this point in time. And for us, we've already well established that will be a difficult task in and of itself.
What's the most famous program or person that you've produced there at Channel 31, Shane?
The list is quite long. Obviously, we always come out with Rove and Hamish and Andy and Waleed Ali, Georgie Coughlin, Dilruk Jaya Singer, Tommy Little, Dave Thornton, you could go on for another sort of 30 minutes.
Oh my God, that's basically the entire generation of current comedians and thinkers that we have now.
Yeah, but you also, what's underreported, I think, is the people who work behind the scenes. And certainly, if you speak to anybody in the TV industry in Melbourne, who works, behind the cameras, you'll find that a large or massive percentage of those people would have at some point touched community television on their way through to being an industry professional. And so that's the underreported side of it as well. It's not just the people in front of the cameras.
The trouble here is that, as with many of these cases, often it's simply a matter of money that might save you, that might stay the execution, to use that phrase. But what you really need is spectrum.
Yeah, it's not a money issue, which is the sad thing, because we're not publicly funded. We've never been. We're self-reliant as an organisation. We only require the federal government to provide us access to spectrum. And we've always contended that until that spectrum is required for a more valuable use and in the eyes of whoever that is, the decision makers, that we should be allowed to stay. There's no saving to the taxpayer by keeping this on air. There is no windfall for the federal government by getting rid of us, certainly in the near future. And so it just makes really no sense.
You're quite right. And at a time when we're just learning in the last couple of weeks, hundreds of journalism jobs to go, local and community newspapers to close down, the idea of losing yet another outlet, it really sticks in your craw, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I mean, we've been in this battle for 6 years now, and obviously I feel like a bit of a broken record where I'm talking about this sort of stuff, but particularly now with everything we're experiencing, this just feels so wrong. But it is what it is. We're doing our best to try and work with the minister to come up with a solution that sees us carry on.
Murray from Mentone has suggested that maybe you could use the wonderful ABC iView platform to continue your existence. The trouble with that is you're going to get the ABC meddling in your programs and your programming, Shane. And I can say as a fully employed member of the ABC, you don't want that.
No, well, certainly one of the things that's great about community television is that there's really quite a wide and diverse variety of perspectives and interest groups and communities that are represented. It really is indicative of the diverse sort of fabric of our local community, and that would be a tragedy to lose that.
Good to talk to you. Good luck. Well, stay in touch with us and let us know if there's any knight in shining armour, knight on shining spectrum that comes along who might be able to help you. Thanks, Shane.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Shane Dunlop, who's Channel 31 General Manager, and the switch might be thrown, this month, the end of June, if there's not some sort of saviour.